this lesson, we will focus on how a student completes the FAFSA online. The first step to completing a FAFSA electronically, either online or through the mobile app, is to create an FSA ID. Both the student and, if dependent, at least one parent will need an FSA ID. This will be considered the electronic signature. A username and password will be required, as well as a unique email address. A unique email address is needed for each FSA ID. This means that a dependent student and parent cannot use the same email address. To complete the FAFSA, it is advisable to have the following documents on hand to be sure information is correct: a Social Security card or Social Security numbers. It is important the information is entered on the FAFSA as it appears on the card. A driver's license, alien registration number for non-U.S. citizens, federal tax information, including the federal tax returns and W-2 forms, records of untaxed income, and information on assets. To complete the FAFSA, the student has options. The student can complete the FAFSA online at studentaid.gov, via the mobile app at MyStudentAid, or by paper application, and a PDF form is available for download, or the student can complete it by phone. Students are strongly encouraged to complete the FAFSA online or by mobile app to avoid completion and processing errors. This video will focus on a step-by-step completion of the FAFSA online at studentaid.gov. Starting at the website, the user will select their role, either student, parent, or preparer. In this video, the student is completing the FAFSA, so we select I am a student and I want to access the FAFSA form. The student will then enter the FSA ID username, email, or mobile number, and password. Once logged in, the student will select which FAFSA to complete. Between October 1st and June 30th, the FAFSA will be available for 2 separate award years, so it is important to select the appropriate year FAFSA. Then a save key can be created. The save key is temporary, but an important step if the student or parent needs to return to complete the FAFSA. The parent will need the save key to return to sign the FAFSA. The next screen displays frequently asked questions regarding the FAFSA, which can be reviewed. Otherwise, the student can move on to begin the FAFSA. The student's Social Security number, name, and date of birth will pre-populate from the FSA ID information. The student's email address and telephone number will also be pre-populated from the FSA ID information if provided, as will the mailing address of the student. In the next step, the student's state of legal residence will be listed, and the student will be asked if they have resided in that state for the past 5 years. If no, a new question will populate, and the student will be required to list the date the residence was established. The student will also be required to list one of 3 citizenship statuses: U.S. citizen, eligible non-citizen, and then include the alien registration number, or not an eligible U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Please note, a person who is not a citizen or not an eligible non-citizen does not qualify for Title IV aid. If an eligible non-citizen is selected, then the alien registration number box will populate and the number must be provided. This tends to be a problem area for some students, so it is important they provide the correct number from their alien registration card. The next area is for the student's education. The student must indicate the high school completion status, what college degree or certificate will be pursued during the academic year, if a first bachelor's degree has been earned prior to the start of the academic year and college grade level, and if interested in work study. The next question deals with selective service. Although this no longer impacts a student's eligibility for Title IV aid, a student must still answer the questions honestly. The student must complete the question regarding gender, male or female. The answer to this question is based on the gender assigned at birth. Students who are male or were assigned male at birth are required to register with Selective Service within 30 days of their 18th birthday. If they are male and not registered, they can select to have registration done for them through the FAFSA. If the student has a driver's license, they should enter the number and state. The next questions ask about the foster youth system and parents' education completion level. A student may qualify for additional grants if they are or were in the foster care system, so the FAFSA will inquire about the student being in the foster care system. Then the student should answer the highest school completed for the parents if known. This is for the parents whose information will be on the FAFSA. Now that student demographics are completed, the student moves on to school selection. The student needs to provide the state, city, and name of the high school attended, then search for the school to be validated. Once the school has been found and verified, then move on to the information about the college or colleges the student is interested in attending. For students who are just entering college, this may be a large list. The student can add up to 10 colleges at one time. For students who are returning to college, this may not be as difficult since they should have only one college to list, unless they plan to transfer schools. There are 2 tabs to use to enter information, by searching the school name, city, and state, or by federal school code. The student will need to add the appropriate housing option for each school once it has been added. Once all schools have been added, the student can move on to the next step. The next section is dependency status. This is where it is determined if parental information is needed. The student begins with marital status. The questions are based on skip logic, so as the student answers no, more questions are presented. If the student answers yes to any of the questions stop, and parental information is optional since the student would be considered independent. In this case, the student is considered dependent. Even if the student is considered a dependent student and parental information is required, information about the parents may not be able to be provided due to special circumstances. That question is presented to the student. If the student answers, "I will provide information about my parents because there is no special circumstance," the application moves into parent demographics. We will cover what happens if the student answers, "I am unable to provide information about my parents," in another lesson video. The FAFSA then moves into parent demographic information, starting with whose information should be provided. There are 4 categories listed on the FAFSA, and based on the answer to the question, the student can determine whose information should be provided. In this case, the student's biological parents are divorced, and the student lives with the father more than the mother. In the next page, it asks what is that parent's marital status. If you click on the word parents, a pop-up box opens and gives you a flowchart of who is the parent when you complete the FAFSA. This will help determine who should be on the FAFSA. Since this student's father is remarried as of the date the FAFSA is being completed, the marital status is listed as married or remarried, and the date of their marriage is input. Then parents' information must also be completed. First is parent 1, which in this case the student is using as the father, so the social security number, last name, first initial, date of birth, and email address are listed. Then parent 2, in this case is the stepmother, and again the social security number, last name, first initial, and date of birth are provided. Then the parents need to answer the same question the student did about living in the state for the past 5 years. Once those questions are asked, the next question is about dependents in order to calculate the household size. The first section is regarding the children, and the bottom section is for other dependents in the household. The requirements for each are different, which is why they are separate. For children, they must rely on your parents for more than half of their financial support between July 1st and June 30th of the FAFSA year, or can answer no to all of the dependency questions on the FAFSA. For other dependents, they must now live with your parents, receive more than half of their support from your parents, and will continue to receive more than half of their financial support from your parents between July 1st and June 30th of the FAFSA year. The total household size is then calculated, including you, the student, your parents, and then the number of dependents just listed in the previous page. Then it will ask, out of the number of eligible dependents in the household, not including parents, how many of those will be enrolled in college between July 1st and June 30th of the FAFSA year. Again, this should not include the parents, but should include you and any other dependent that was just counted in the household. The next section is for parent financials. The tax information is based on 2 years prior tax information, so it will ask if your parents have completed that tax year IRS income tax return. The parents will indicate if already completed a return, will file a return, or are not going to file a return. If they have filed a tax return, then indicate what type of tax return they filed. They will then indicate their tax filing status as well. If they filed a tax return already, then they may be eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool, also known as the IRS DRT. they can link directly to the IRS site from the FAFSA. If they choose to do so, they can proceed to the IRS site, enter information from their tax return, which must match exactly. Once they submit their request, if it matches and the IRS locates the tax information, it will list the data available to be transferred. They have the option to transfer or not to transfer. Once the information has been transferred, a confirmation on the FAFSA will be listed and the student can complete the FAFSA. There will still be items to be completed, but any data element that has already been transferred from the IRS will now say transferred from IRS. Any blank item will need to be entered. In this case, the student is not transferring data from the IRS and will complete the information manually. So the first income item is adjusted gross income, and it indicates what line to look at on the tax return to obtain this number. The amount is listed in whole dollars. All amounts are listed in whole dollars on the FAFSA. Then the parent's income earned from work for Parent 1 and Parent 2. Remain consistent in the use of Parent 1 and Parent 2 throughout the FAFSA. And again, it tells the student where to obtain the data for this section. Next is the income tax. This is the amount of tax owed to the IRS, not the amount withheld. Again, this is another common mistake, so be sure to look at the correct line on the tax return if completing this item manually. Now we move on to the untaxed income portion. This is where the majority of the information may not be transferred from the IRS. The items will default to 0, so they must be updated if the item applies. One note, the second item in this list on student, college, grant, and scholarship aid reported to the IRS in your parent's income, it only applies if your parent reported the scholarships or grants as income on their tax return. This is not common. Review the questions on this page for additional financial information. If they are other than 0, then update them. And again, for this page, if there are items that should be updated, be sure to do that. If there are any questions on any of these items, the question marks at the end of each item will provide more information. The next section is related to the parent's assets. There is an asset threshold based on the age of the older parent, so that amount is listed. The question will ask if the parent assets exceed that number. If yes, the parent will be presented with additional asset questions. This will include the current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts, net worth of the parent's investments, including real estate, but not the home they live in, and the net worth of their current business and/or investment farms, but not to include a family farm or family business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. The last financial section is for the student financials. The questions will be similar to those for the parent. They will begin with whether the student completed a tax return for the base tax year. Remember, that is 2 years prior. In this case, the student did not complete a tax return and will not be completing one. Since the student is not going to file a tax return, it shows us the student is not eligible to transfer data from the IRS. The student is still required to indicate how much was earned from working in that year. Any wages, salaries, tips, etc. in whole dollars. The next step is for some additional financial information. Again, like the parent, the information will default to 0, so if the information applies, it will need to be updated. The same for this page of additional financial information questions. If the information applies to the student, then it should be updated. One question that appears for the student that is not asked of the parent is the last question on this page. Money received or paid on your behalf, not reported elsewhere on this form. If the student received money or had bills paid on their behalf, including money received from a parent or other person whose financial information is not listed on the FAFSA, it must be included here. Finally, the student must complete asset information. There is no asset threshold for the student, so the student must list all assets, including current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts, net worth of investments, including real estate, but not the home they live in, and the net worth of their current business and/or investment farms, but not to include a family farm or family business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. The next step is the FAFSA summary, which shows each section separately. They can also be expanded, and it can also be printed. Once it has been reviewed, and if everything is correct, the student moves on to reviewing the terms of the agreement. The final step is to agree to the terms and sign the FAFSA. Once submitted, the student will receive a confirmation page, which will show what is needed. In this case, the parent's signature. This can be provided now by having the parent click on the Provide Parent Signature link, or the student can click on Save FAFSA Information and then exit the FAFSA form, and the parent can return later to sign it. This concludes this video lesson on submitting the FAFSA online.